We have often been asked questions about Freelance, our Pearson 36 cutter, also sometimes known as a Pearson 367. What features does it have? What equipment does it have? What is it that makes it such a good cruising boat for Vicky and I? So we're going to do a walkthrough, and we'll show you things above deck and we'll show you things down here below decks. We hope you enjoy it.
Freelance is what is called a classic yacht. It's hull number 4, launched in '82, and overbuilt by today's standards. The original owner had it in a Long Island Sound for 3 years, but it came west in the mid-'80s. Since Vicky and I bought it in '91, we have gradually replaced the salt-pitted parts, which was something I fully expected to do, having grown up in Denmark. The Pearson 36 cutter was designed by Bill Shaw and shares the look of his highly popular Pearson 365. But it is a very different sailboat. Besides the cutter rig, instead of the kedge rig, it has a deeper draft at 5.5 feet compared with the 365's 4.5 foot shoal draft. The keel is 7,300 pounds of fiberglass encapsulated lead. There are no keel bolts. And the rudder is well protected by a sturdy skeg. The hull is wine glass shaped, which means it pounds less in a seaway than the newer dinghy-inspired designs. Its beam is 11.5 feet.
It's really designed around a couple sailing this boat. It's very easy to handle short-handed. And we really have enjoyed it for a number of years for that reason. Sometimes we have a couple joining us. Sometimes we have them for a weekend. Sometimes we have them for a week. Sometimes a little more. And we used to sail very much with the boat with our kids. And we have also sailed with our grandkids on it. So it's a lot of fun to have the kids along. But it's really a boat that's set up for long distance cruising. And we have 50 gallons of fuel, we have 50 gallons of water under the port settee, 50 under the starboard settee, and 50 gallons of water underneath the reverse. So this is a boat that has range, and we have tremendous amount of storage in this. The speed potential is about 7.3, 7.4 knots, because we have a 30-foot waterline, and we can easily push that under sail. But most of the time, we need more than 10 knots, 12 knots to really sail well with this boat because it's heavy, 13 gross ton. Cruising weight, probably between 23 and 25,000 pounds. So it needs a lot of power to keep it going. And light air, it's a little slow unless we put up our asymmetric spinnaker or if we put up our 150 Jenny. And the 150 Jenny, we have a lot of arguments about putting up or not because it's a lot of work, and we most of the time wind up turning on the engine when it's light air. But I do really like that asymmetric spinnaker when we get that up. It handles really well in a seaway. We have been in heavy weather with this boat many times, and we know it's a boat that can take care of us, and we like it that way. It sometimes can handle the conditions better than we can. And that's the way it should be. Comfort-wise, this is a very comfortable boat. You know, everything is set up here for basically living aboard this boat for an extended period of time. And we have over the years made lots of improvements on it that have made it just the way we want it. We're very happy with it. Some of the first things we did on this boat, putting on a heavy autopilot that can handle it in any conditions, put on a heavy-duty heater that is able to keep up with the cold nights that you sometimes see in Lake Superior, especially along the Canadian side.
So let's look at some details starting at the bow, where there's one of our best labor-saving upgrades, which was adding an electric anchor windlass to the boat. Freelance's current bowsprit may look, at a first glance, like the standard and somewhat fragile Pearson 36 cutter's teak bowsprit. But it's not. Instead, it's a thick and super strong fiberglass slab covered in teak on which a hefty Muir windlass, Lumar chain stopper, and 2 Garhauer bow rollers are mounted. We carry 110 feet of 5/16 high tensile chain and 250 feet of 5/8 road, which is enough for most of our anchoring situations. By the way, the windlass is controlled by a quick handheld which plugs into the gunwale, because we did not want any foot switches. They tend to leak. A second quick controllable chain counter is in the cockpit, close by the helm. The modified bowsprit was a very complex project, which also involved a major electrical upgrade. Maybe I'll do a separate video about that at some other time. Freelance has always carried a jib topsail and a roller furler, but the factory installed unit aged out years ago. We replaced it with the Schaefer furler that you see here. It's stronger, safer, and works much better. The club-footed and self-tacking staysail is next. Some people don't like the boom, but I do. I find it quite easy to work with, assuming you tighten down the staysail sheet first, so the boom doesn't flop around while you work on the foredeck. I should also point out that the staysail is really the working jib, not the jib topsail. Usually you carry 3 sails: the jib topsail, which is sometimes called a Yankee, a staysail, and a mainsail. It is a different sail configuration, but one that breaks up the sail area in smaller sails, which make them easy to handle in a blow. Vicky and I had not sailed cutters before we bought Freelance, but it was super easy to get used to. And today we prefer cutter rigs to sloops. It's an extremely versatile rig and well suited for heavy weather. But there is a compromise. A sloop will point slightly higher than a cutter. On a cutter, the mast is further aft and shorter than what it is on the sloop of the same length. And that means it's like you always are sailing around with a reef in the main. Under 14 knots of wind, we normally use the mainsail and the general, except when we use a cruising chute. And we really like to play around with that cruising chute. Not only does it look pretty, but it's fun to play with. From 14 to 20 knots, it's a full main, it's a staysail, and it's a jib topsail. It's a great combination for that wind range. At 20 knots, we roll up the jib topsail, and at that point, the whole rig becomes self-tacking if you wish to do that. And it's very convenient when you are short-handed sailing. 25 knots, we put the first reef in the main, and we move the running backstays to the furthest aft we can on the track. That's to stabilize the mast. At 30 knots, we put in the second reef. And at 35 knots, we drop the staysail. Now, we have sailed this boat in wind speeds as high as 42 knots parent going downwind with just that double reef main, and it was very, very stable. And we really had a good ride with it, but it did have a tendency to want to head up a little bit in the puffs. We actually got our latest UK mainsail with a third reef, just to err on the side of caution. The boat specifications only call for 2 reefs in the main, and we have never used that third reef, so I really can't speak to its value. By the way, reefing is handled by jiffy reefing at the mast, which is also where the halyard winches are for raising and lowering the sails. The side decks are plenty wide, and long ago we installed strong fittings for rigging jack lines along the deck from the bow to the cockpit coamings, and we also have heavy-duty pad eyes in the cockpit for attaching safety harnesses. Of course, I should briefly make mention of the bright work. When Bill Shaw designed these boats, people wanted a lot of exterior teak because it was a look of the traditional sailing yachts. The bright work certainly adds great beauty to the boat, but it is a high-maintenance item. We consider a Dodger a necessity for the Great Lakes, and we added a bimini with solar panels a few years ago. We do have lee claws for the cockpit sides in heavy weather, and also carry canvas side curtains to enclose the cockpit at anchor or when at a dock. Our 260 watts of solar panels usually, when it's not raining all day, give us enough amps to cover all our normal 24 use of electricity, and we never turn off our refrigerator. It should not be a surprise that we get good solar results. Even though we obviously are in a very northern part of the US, our home port on the south shore of Lake Superior is actually about the same latitude as the southern coast of France. The cockpit may seem huge, and we can have quite a crowd in it for social hour, but it's actually well sized and suited for open ocean use. The drainage is good, and the full bridge deck keeps the volume smaller than you would think. The traveler is in the cockpit by the bridge deck, somewhat within reach from the helm, and the main sheet is controlled by the winch, which is on top of the cabin. The self-tacking staysail is trimmed by a single winch on the starboard coaming, and the jib topsail by 2 Lumar 44s. This arrangement makes the boat easy to handle when you are short-handed. But as I've already mentioned, one of our earliest boat improvement projects was to put an oversized below-decks autopilot on board, which we long ago nicknamed HAL. Its control panel is right by the helm, and we can, of course, also control the autopilot from our chart plotter at the nav station below. Our Ray Marine instrument cluster is to the port on the forward bulkhead. Each instrument is, of course, integrated in a network, and the engine panel is forward beneath the traveler, which makes it easy to monitor. There is, of course, also a full-function remote VHF mic by the helm next to the autopilot controls. A hand-operated bilge pump is on the port side of the cockpit by the helm. You can fully stretch out in the cockpit seats, and we often have crew who prefer to sleep in the cockpit when the weather is pleasant. Incidentally, we had the faux teak non-skid covering installed when we record the cockpit locker lids. The previous owner had somehow cracked the top of the lids, which allowed water to seep into the core, making them soft. The 2 10-pound propane tanks are invented cockpit lockers, one on each side. It's another upgrade that the lids now lock in place. The cockpit storage is huge. This is the lazarette where we keep spares and miscellaneous equipment. We use a starboard locker for our sails, and it also has a 6-gallon water heater, a second anchor, a Danforth, secondary chain and rod, battery charger, and 3 AGM Series 31 batteries on the port locker. One of the batteries is a dedicated starting battery. We added a stern anchor roller, which we have often used with our second anchor up in the narrow and rocky anchorages on Lake Superior's Canadian North Shore. It also comes in handy when we are towing the dinghy. Another boat project was the stainless steel davits. These are from Ocean Marine, even though the Pearson 36 cutter actually have factory fittings for attaching davits to the aft pulpit. We went with a more modern setup because it was much sturdier. Our dinghy is a 310, and we have a 15 horsepower Mercury outboard, which we stow on the port side on the pulpit. It weighs close to 80 pounds and is a bit awkward to handle, so we added a Gaha motor hoist some years ago. It has made it so much easier. The radar dome is on the backstay and is gimbaled. Some may say it's mounted too low for open ocean conditions, but in my opinion, its height is perfect for the Great Lakes.
Well, that's the end of our above decks tour of Freelance, our Pearson 36 cutter. Join us for the next episode where we look at what's down below.